Welcome to our today's module on how to make successfully writing a paper easy and even fun. I'm Oliver Cornely, and we have likely met on campus, and this is an activity of the Translational Scientist in Aging Research course of the Institute of Translational Research at the CECAD Institute here in Cologne. So at our Excellence Cluster, many people know how to write papers, and they do so very successfully, and they have their routines. For those who are new in the field, in research, in medicine in this case, they may have their issues with writing, because writing as such often is not part of the education of what is being taught at university. Certainly not in human medicine, and likely not in most other faculties where our many researchers come from. So for these, and for those who are experienced, maybe there's the one or the other thought in here that might be worth playing with or implementing. So what I want to lead you through is how to write an article, and I will do so in a very structured fashion, and that is maybe the key message: structure, 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 so to say. There were these strange things during COVID pandemic. There were many more articles, you know that, I guess, that were written than ever before, and apparently this is coming down now. We can see that in 2024 with the estimates for impact factors that are declining back to normal, maybe. So there were not really good explanations, I think, for this. So there was, in quarantine, researchers had more time to write because they were confined with the computer. And maybe that is partially true. I don't know. Certainly not for medical doctors. They were all super active with their patients because they just had way more patients. And still there were more papers. So maybe researchers increased efficiency. That we, of course, like. Everybody likes to increase efficiency. So let's think that was that one. If they increased efficiency, then likely they improved on the structure, how they approached problems. But before sharing with you how we write papers at this institute here at the Excellence Cluster, I'd like to share with you why I do not like writing manuscripts. I actually don't even necessarily write postcards if I can avoid. So writing is burdensome. Okay, so a blank white paper staring at me is somewhat intimidating, and I may not feel easy enough to just start writing a text. And that is because I never had a course on this. There are courses out there, and ours today is just one of them, but it's the one that we use when we write or publish a paper roughly once a week, a little bit more frequent than that, with the researchers and scientists from this institute. So, and there were no writing courses, as I said, at my medical school, and I think that there still is only one course. Actually, that's our course that we provide. One of the teaching activities we provide for the medical school students. And if I start writing plain text, then usually I must rewrite this multiple times. That's I'm never happy with what I wrote until I have rewritten it several times, which is not very efficient, I would say. So I write a text, then it feels awkward, and it reminded me of when I first saw me on a video that was taken while I was giving a presentation, and then you see that video that feels strange, and maybe less so today with all the selfies that we all are used to do. So then writing is very time consuming. Okay, it is time consuming, and you need to have your piece and nobody who interferes. You need to have a whole stretch of time and not only bits and pieces to fully concentrate. And if that writing process is interrupted, then I need really time to get back on route and start again into an efficient writing. And hospitals and labs are places where, by definition, you are always interrupted, I guess, and rather than having your continuity that you need. So all of this adds to what the first bullet here says: writing is burdensome. I believe that many will agree. There might be some geniuses who just sit down and they write the whole book, so to say, in one stretch, but I'm certainly not. So what I need to do to get out of this intimidating situation is I need to structure the thread, as always, beyond writing papers, and then the thread loses its power. So we slice it, okay? And before doing so, please, I'd like to share with you some more technical aspects. One is, how do I name electronic files? So a document of a word processing program, Microsoft Word, likely for many of us, some alternatives out there. So the naming convention for electronic files is important, and it looks a bit busy, that slide. However, I'll lead you through. So it's relatively easy. So you have a project name and acronym, because otherwise it should not be too long. This is already a pretty long file name here. But a project name, that could be an acronym like this EU COVAD. That is one of our studies that we did in patients with advanced age, where we wanted to know what's the best pathway for them to receive their corona vaccines. Anyway, so EU COVAD, UCOVAD, as we call this briefly here, and underscore, because underscore is less disturbing for some of the technical systems we work, more palatable than a hyphen. Then a document name that should be a single word. For example, here it's the master protocol. Then underscore again, then the date of this version. And that date can only be changed by the owner of the document, so the creator of the document. Underscore again, and here somebody worked on this whose initials are LG, and then somebody else worked on it with the initials MB. And that then goes back to the owner of the document. The owner would go through it and see what was changed and correct changes, and create a new version, likely on then July 29, that was the case. If you have several versions on the same day, you may introduce the date and the time. So 12H17, for example, for 17 minutes after 12 o'clock afternoon, when the document was saved. So that might become part of the name as well. But let's keep it a bit simple and not so much in a hurry like during the pandemic, and we may not have different versions on the same day in this example. So only the main author, the owner of the document, is allowed to change the date in the name of the file. That's important, because then automatically all these versions will automatically sort in your folder, and you will have on the top or bottom, however you sort this, you will have the most current version, and you will have the one that is really the valid one, and you don't deal with multiple different versions. So it might look in your folder like something like this, okay? Of course, not, it will all be black on white or white on black, whatever the settings. It won't be colorful as it is here. But you see that we have the word draft in there, and you can have a version in there, and but still you want to have the date and the initials of those co-workers, of those co-authors who worked on this. And then once the master protocol is ready, in this case for submission to ethics, it would be the version 1.0, the green one. You submit it, you get it back with some suggestions, what could be improved and changed, or what needs to be improved or changed, as suggestions from, for example, ethics committee. And then you would then work on that version one, and you see you already, of course, understood the principle. So some more technical things. This is all coming from errors or specifics that I found in documents that were sent back to me. So you should select the language at the beginning. In the end, it's driven by which target journal you are choosing. Many journals they don't care too much, but they all want to have either US or English UK language. So you need to agree on one of these two. The paragraph settings, of course, there you can find your own way there, but what I usually do is before it's 0 points and after it's 6 points. And all fonts must be either, and that's important because it's really annoying to the eye of the reader. Otherwise, all fonts must be either with or without the serifs. That's the little feet and little things that that make the individual letters more readable. And a typical one with serifs would be Times New Roman and all its iterations. And the typical one with no serifs is Arial or Calibri, and there are, of course, multiple others. Line spacing should be 1.5. It's easier to read. And if somebody would print it to make comments, then it's not the usual thing that we would do here. But if that is being done, then it's anyway better to have a bit more space. Then we always recommend to use either EndNote or one of the other reference managers and to switch the instant formatting off, because instant formatting can be really annoying. You're just thinking of something and then the whole system starts to work and you can't type your thoughts in. So more general rules, only a few more. Tense, stick to the same tense, because otherwise we have to correct this at some later point during draft development. Usually it's simple passed throughout the article. There might be reasons to deviate from that general rule, but if you do so, you should do so knowingly on purpose. And it must fulfill a purpose to change the time. Then chronology, I highlighted that one because it means that whatever you present should come in a chronological order. That is the case for diagnostic sequences, description of symptoms, if we think of a patient. But if we think of a procedure in the lab, you would usually have this in a chronologic sequence, because otherwise it's less easy to comprehend what was done. And it's the same if you write your introduction, for example, then you would present maybe after a lead-in sentence or so, you would try to really present everything in chronological order. And that is just way more easy to understand. The other order is alphanumeric order. And specifically when you list equally ranked objects, so you don't want to rank them, you just want to list them. You have 4 different entities, for example, for different drugs. For me as a clinician, would be the easiest example. So, for example, the echinocandins, that is a group of antifungal drugs. If they are listed, and there are 4, and they are all in the same class, and usually you would list them just to say, okay, I'm talking about echinocandins. These are the 4 representatives of that class. Then if that is the case, then they are all equal, and you should have them in alphabetical order, because if you put them in a different order than alphabetical, any other sequence in alphabetical would imply ranking. And it says, and then the audience or the reader starts to think, why isn't this alphabetical? Why is there a ranking order? And if it's alphabetical, there is no doubt that they are all the same as you just stated in your text. Numbers and figures, that's very generic. I always forget which number is still written in full and from which number onwards it's actually a number. Apparently there is something with like up to 13 and written in full, and then 14 and above as actual numbers. Not sure whether that's the only rule, but it should definitely be consistent in your documents. And Don't start a phrase with writing a number. If so, then you'll need to write it in full. That is something that everybody demands. The exception is an abstract for a conference. If there is a character count, then you are really pretty free to do what you want to get the message across and save characters. And figures, that's an important one. All text and figures should be in bold if at all possible, and then there should be contrast. So it should be dark on bright background or the other way around. And if using colors, ask somebody with just one X chromosome to have a look whether these colors are whether it's just whether it works, your color scheme. Then when sending your draft to co-authors, you would click on track changes so that you are not sitting there with a more burdensome version or several versions of your document that you need to compare. And use track changes actually really for all relevant changes. Sometimes there are small things that can go without, but I actually like to see them all. So, and if there's more than one round of exchange, then remove all the resolved comments. So remove them, that they are no longer visible. Don't just resolve them, but remove them, because they are just distracting at that point when there's the next round of people reading this paper again, this paper being born, so to say. So it increases efficiency. So now how do I really start working? I open a Word document, and that means that it's empty. It's an empty white, that threatening empty white paper in front of me. And I write down the headers. It's always the same sequence, and the headers are always the same, right? We start with introduction, the abstract we do later. And when we finish the introduction, other parts would then follow, of course. So you start at the top. And when writing, use bullet points. And that is a bit special, I guess, but many medical writers use this. So when writing, use bullet points and do not immediately produce full sentences, but rather enter your thoughts. So the things that you want to express, that you want to address, that you don't want to forget. What you could do, in parentheses, so to say, what you could do is the moment where you think about your project that you want to start, then you could already create that blank white document. You enter all the people who help you, and you don't forget anybody. And if you have a thought at somewhere in the middle of the night, so to say, at some day where you certainly are not yet there starting to write the paper on your research, then you still could write down that thought somewhere. And if you've ever thought, where do I park this so that I don't forget it? That's the place. That's where it should go. So you type in all your ideas that you want to mention under this header. And I jumped over that point that you need to agree on with with whoever will become the senior author of that paper, when to share and when to route it through, because that depends on what you agree, what you feel appropriate, and the both of you, so to say, feel appropriate, and it's a matter of timing. I like to have smaller increments because then I can do them in between other tasks. However, others might choose other ways there. Just speak about it so that you know what and have a chance to agree on something. So once you have all the thoughts that should go into the introduction, then you start to sort all these bullets. One thought per bullet, or one bullet per thought. You sort them into a relevant and reasonable order. To me, that would be chronological order always. And then you might deviate from chronological order for some reason, but you need to have a reason for that. So it needs to fulfill a didactic sense. And that chronological order might be from the perspective of a patient, of a pathogen, of a molecule, and it just helps the reader to understand specifically, importantly, those readers who are not 100% into the topic, but who try to get into the topic with using your paper and trying to understand. And you want to make want to avoid misunderstanding. Then you convert all these bullets into one sentence each. And then you remove the bullets and you have plain text. And then, of course, you go through it, whether it reads nice. But it should. There's not a lot after all these 9 steps that needs to be changed. So usually you have a nice text then that is very readable and catches the interest of your readers. So the introduction in more detail. The length, usually not more than 1 page. And in the introduction, you would have a lot of references. I mean, whatever the number is that is allowed by the journal, check out what the number is so that you don't exceed that limit. And however, there is no sentence without a reference in the introduction. And that is a general rule. With any rule, there might be exceptions, but I didn't see a lot of exceptions during my last whatever number of publications. So use as few references as possible. Ideally, you would just find that one perfect reference that supports your argument that you make. And if one is enough, then why should you use several? Don't use reviews, guidelines, or books, but whenever possible, use the original publication. Go back to that original source. If you have a review article read and you think, oh, that thought is great, and I want to reference that in my introduction, don't do so by quoting that review, because if that thought in that review had a reference, go back to that reference, and you may be astonished to see how often reviews cite reviews. And sometimes you go back, and you do not find the original article because it never existed, or something was misspelled or misreferenced, so to say. So you always need to go back to the original source. That's what you researchers do, right? Okay, so often a manuscript may result from previous work of your own group. And if that is the case, then it makes, of course, sense to reference your own material. There are certain limits for that. They are by journal, but if you publish something that exactly expresses it is an original article, expresses what you want to reference, then it's natural to do so. And sometimes you either would be prone to go through the list of the publications on that topic of your group to make sure that you didn't forget anything, because that looks a little bit strange if the reviewers of the journal then see, wow, they didn't even reference their own stuff, although that would have been a perfect one. Then it can be a bit insulting to be drawn to that aspect. So, but don't cite only your work. That doesn't make too much sense, except from rare occasions where so both the best and most suitable, and quite some of these might be your own work. Article structure from a medical point of view, methods, or here patients and methods. But forget about the patients, just read this as methods if you don't deal with patients or patient samples yet, I have to say, because we all strive for, in the end, translating to real patient settings and patient situations. So generally, there are no citations in this section. There are some exceptions, and you have seen such exceptions, I guess. That is, if a citation which is relevant, which describes the method already, and then we often see something like, we did this like this paper, and you reference something in the method section. But you certainly don't do so with every sentence. So there's a big difference here between the introduction and the methods in terms of the frequency of citations. And if you have the method somewhere, maybe published in your own work or somebody else published the method that you're applying, and if you describe this in full again, then it might lead to an automatic flagging of your manuscript in the submission systems of the respective publisher. it might lead to an immediate flagging as plagiarism, which is not plagiarism, but it is flagged. So it raises an eyebrow there. So you may save word count by just citing the paper where the method is described in detail. Further article structure, the results section. There are definitely no citations in this section. Okay? If you have a citation in the results section, occasionally that happens, then read that argument, read that line, read that paragraph, and think about whether you placed it in the right part of your paper. Because sometimes, almost always, I would even say, such a reference in the results section belongs to either introduction or methods or discussion, but not in the results. So think about that whenever you find a reference in the results section. And a very general rule is avoiding redundancy between text and tables or text and figures and tables. However, if there is a key result, then it's okay to have it in there twice. It should be crisp, that repetition, that redundancy, but it makes, of course, sense to describe it in text because it's so important, and to have a figure which is catchy and is what might end up on a PowerPoint slide of somebody referencing your work. That already brings us to the discussion. And the thing is, of course, that you discuss key findings of your present study and you compare it with published literature. That's what you do, right? It sounds pretty easy. You shouldn't necessarily cite names of authors, but cite their studies. Smith, Miller, and Mayer said whatever, found I don't know what. So one can do that if that is more a historic thing, like the discovery of DNA or something, but otherwise you should cite the studies and not necessarily have their names in there. It interrupts the flow. Be decent. Don't state anywhere, and certainly not the first sentence, this is the most wonderful study that was ever done on the planet, the largest, best, only sample in the world, and these things. People will know anyway because the work is being judged by our peers, so they will be knowledgeable in the field, and they will understand that it's the first without necessarily seeing that in front of seeing that on the computer screen. Like, to the best of our knowledge, this is the, as I said, most fantastic thing on ever. So we don't want to read these things. It's all word count that you don't need to spend on this. Each paragraph starts with a key finding in the discussion, main finding at the beginning of the first paragraph, and then ideally in one crisp sentence. I know that many of the research, much of the research is not possible to have this in a crisp sentence, but often it is. So try to figure out and spend some time on working on that first sentence with your co-authors. And then you need a paragraph on limitations of your study, and that should be the last but one paragraph. And the last paragraph doesn't necessarily have that conclusion word as a subheader, but it should be and convey the conclusion. So that gives you the opportunity to have very briefly what is the main result and conclusion then of your work. And sometimes people don't have time, they don't read the whole paper. They should get the key messages, and they always will look at the end, like in a crime story, reading the last page first. So some do, and you need to think about that, and you need to consider this. So now that we think we are done, because now we have the discussion, so all the text is ready, we can maybe on the next day open that whole document again and start to work on the abstract. And so that is being done at the end, not at the beginning. You may have an abstract because you presented your stuff at some conference, You may have your abstract first, but often that abstract will change with the final publication. Ideally, you have the publication almost ready and then submit the abstract somewhere, but that time sequence not always works. Usually an abstract is structured and it may have these subheaders of background, objectives, etc. But sometimes it's not structured and it still follows a structure. It's not random how the sentences are written there. So it still follows a structure. And even though these words, background, etc., might not be there, that's the sequence from background to conclusion that the reader needs. And you're likely perfectly aware of, but this is sort of a chronological order. Then we need to fulfill some more tasks to submit this finally to a journal. And one of these tasks is, again, on article structure, the keywords. Purpose of the keywords is that your article is being found in searches. And of course, there are full text searches, but still keywords are needed for quite some databases, I guess. Avoid the words that are in the manuscript title, because these are becoming keywords anyway. So they are keywords already. So you have with the keywords, if there is a limit of 3 or 5 or so keywords, you do have the opportunity to have some additional keywords that are not already part of the title. So now we go all the way back to the end of the text where the references are. And I'd like to briefly just highlight there's a citation style. It depends on the journal. And if you use a reference manager program, then it's of course very easy to adapt. For internal work or funding proposals, we usually use Vancouver. It's a good choice and has some advantages. So start with Vancouver, and then if you find something else nicer, you can change. However, for the journal, it's pretty clear. They will tell you what they need. And then there is that question where to finally place that little number of the reference. And the citation. And so the citation should be placed before the punctuation, before the full stop, and always at the end of a phrase and of a sentence, rarely elsewhere in that sentence. That might occasionally be reasonable to do, but it's really an exception. And so if you place the reference before the full stop, then you have a strict rule to do it like this, and then you can, your reference manager program will be happy, because if this has been done very consistently throughout the entire text, means introduction and discussion, then you can change this without it's not a large task then to change it. It's not burdensome because the program will do it for you. Article structure leads us now to tables and figures. So the next part that is usually following the reference list. Figures should be able to stand alone. Again, that PowerPoint example or whatever other program being used for projection, if you see that your work is being cited because you're sitting in that room and somebody is talking about that topic and then citing your, there is hardly people will use text in our research fields. They will use the tables of figures on their slides, and so it should be understandable as a standalone, so that you, whenever you write the title for a figure or for a table, it should be fully comprehensible. It should be every information in there, so that you do not need to go back to the text to understand what's presented in the table or figure. So imagine a presenter who cuts and pastes the figure from your paper to his or her slide. all abbreviations in a table of figure, everything used need to be explained in the legend. If a abbreviation has been used only once in a table, then think about whether it's necessary at all. And you would put them in the legend of the respective non-text item, um, even if in the text you already used and introduced that acronym. And the reason is easy because the text might be separated from the figure from the table. For example, on that slide example. Images should use color as appropriate. That's getting more and more easy and cheaper because less and less journals are being printed. So you usually do not need to decide, do I go for color or do I go for black and white? Do what is didactically the best, okay? What really helps to convey a message and make the figure easier to understand than the image. Now we go back to the first part, to the very first line where you collected on that white paper before you wrote all that manuscript, where you collected during all the process of your experiments, of your studies, and of your writing, everybody who helped you with that. And then you need to decide what to do with these people. So the person writing the paper is the first author in my institute. That's a given. So that'll be you. And then the principal investigator or main other researcher would usually be the last author, but needs to have input, not just the head of department, so to say, but needs to have input on that specific paper. Then there are the sub-investigators in between and the project management. Don't forget about these guys. And the statistician, data manager, and there might be others that are not on the list here, but these are all people you should not forget or think about whether there was a data manager, whether there was a statistician helping you. Some of us can do this themselves, so then you don't need to address these lines. There might be external sub-investigators, and then you think about where is the cutoff, what was the contribution, the essential contributors that do not fulfill the authorship criteria set forth by the journals. Then they may go into the acknowledgement, technical support, study nurses, for example, in my case, may find their names in the acknowledgements and ask them whether they are happy with being named. But the best is that at the very beginning, when a project is conceived, you just continuously write down all the names of all the people who helped and what their role and function was, so that you don't forget any contributor. Because if you forget anybody, that is of course then really an issue and lots of avoidable discussions and harm. And you should collect at some point, and maybe you want to do that while you write and not at the very end when you are now eager to submit your paper. Collect all the names of the authors, as said, and then their Authorship numbers if they do have. And again, it helps to find the paper more easily after it has been published. And that's just an example with some of these Authorship numbers here. The target journal, you already thought about which one that should be. And so you select a journal before drafting a final manuscript. But maybe there are several journals that could be interested in and could be a good place for it. If there is in these target journal that you look for, if there was a recent article on that topic, then you really need to cite them if that is appropriate. But if you could really choose between two different, so to say, identical articles that both would be sufficient to support an argument in your paper, then you would certainly choose the one of the journal where you want to submit. And that's just because the editors, they like to see their own journal being cited because of the impact factor, and but it needs to be appropriate. So don't deliberately, you would never cite something that has nothing to do with your argument. It doesn't support it, and just to have something cited from that would be pretty ridiculous. So nobody does that. So and then follow, of course, the author guidelines of the targeted journal in detail. Some allow, some are now really more liberal and allow papers that have been rejected elsewhere. You don't need to reformat everything for the next journal, but you would reformat unless the author guideline explicitly states and invites to submit in different formats. That's an exception, but sometimes some journals are happy and maybe with any format, and maybe that is a development going, an evolution in that direction, so that we don't spend too much time with formatting for journals and finally reject the paper. So that is then really not a work worth. And so after accepted, you could then go for the final format. But that depends on the journal. So check the author guidelines. If they accept, then that's in there. The citation style, of course, and is unique to the individual journal and is part of the instructions. And so if you don't follow the author instructions, that might lead to rejection, and that might lead to frustration and more work for the author. So follow the guidance that is issued by the individual journal. So coming to the end and sort of summarizing what I said so far, the key message is slice your work into small packages. That is what makes it palatable and what makes it a not too intimidating huge task. When beginning a new project that will lead to a manuscript, open that empty Word document and already fill in the thoughts. And before that, even the structure. So authors, abstract, introduction, etc. So that your thoughts fall in the right places there. And write down all the names of people involved from the beginning. And if it's a 5-year project, then you may not remember everybody. So better make your notes and collect all your thoughts, as said. And when starting with the actual writing process, convert the thoughts to bullet points. So they are a little bit more elaborate, but they don't go over 5 lines, okay? So they are not yet full sentences, and certainly never more than 1 full sentence per bullet. So it should be crisp. Then sort all the bullets in a chronological order, and do so starting with the introduction. And then convert the bullets into 1 sentence each, and sort all the bullets in chronological order again, and then connect the sentences to make them flow, and then remove the bullets. So the slices should be so thin that you can improve them, even between, well, when you're tired, yeah, so that you can do one of these little slices that only takes 30 minutes or an hour, and then your paper will gradually come to life in these increments. And you don't need to have a full week in front of you, or I will write this during my holidays, then I'm not disturbed by anything. That usually doesn't work. So try to make it something that is being created while you work on your research topic. Well, with that, thank you for joining today. I hope you liked it. And if there are any questions, you know how to find me. And just drop me a line or call me. And I'm happy to explain and happy to discuss what I presented today. And of course, I'm happy to hear whether you liked it and whether you found it helpful. So thank you very much, and thank you for being a researcher at CECAD, which is a fantastic place here in Cologne to do research on aging and aging-related diseases. Thank you, and see you on campus. Goodbye.